Are we ready to go?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Cool. Well, hi. How you doing?
Hi,
You good?
Matt. I'm going well. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. We have had a little introduction before this, but I think it's
hmm
always nice to just give some pleasantries at the start of a call like this. So today we're going to be discussing Relay. First of all, can you tell us who are Relay? What do you do?
Yeah, so Relay is consistent of a team of 30 full-time employees now. We've really grown massively since we started back in 2020. And simply put, we are the simple Bitcoin app in every pocket for Europeans over here that makes buying Bitcoin within a minute super fast and simple.
Amazing, nice. And why was Relay founded initially? Did you see a gap in the market of users potentially struggling to accumulate BTC? I know there's alternatives, I won't mention names, that can be potentially a little expensive to use or complicated to use. So I'm guessing that was maybe kind of the basis of founding Relay, but do you know explicitly why?
Yeah, so we've got two co-founders. One is Julian Liniger, who's our CEO. He's actually been quite public also at Bitcoin Magazine events in Amsterdam, or you will have read about him in one of the posts. And the other one is Adam Bilichan, who's our CTO. And they really came together at a hackathon event where they realized, hey, we both like Bitcoin. And there's no real easy way to buy Bitcoin. Like, sure, you can get on the exchanges, but it's always, especially out of Switzerland, it was a bit complicated with like the local currency and the transfers. And we wish, if we could have done it, that we had an app in our pocket, which we could send to family and friends. And within a few simple taps, they can then buy Bitcoin and also buy Bitcoin in a self-custodial manner. So that was basically the kickoff. They met, they went to this hackathon event. I think they came in third, if I remember correctly. And ever since then, they've been sort of going along, got some initial first pre-seed capital, and then started building out the app with its own brokerage now, and all of the additional services, which I'm sure we get into later on. And from there on out, just kept growing as the Bitcoin network does. And that's where we're at today with the 30 full-time employees, including myself. And the vision to bring Bitcoin to everyone.
Amazing. And you mentioned the self-custodian aspect of
Mm-hmm.
Relay there. I think that's a big aspect that a lot of other wallets and definitely exchanges aren't necessarily too great at. So it's good to see Relay really kind of trying to make that a core principle of the company. Do you have any kind of insights into why self-custody for retail users might be a benefit? Because I know a lot of people may be a bit nervous at the thought of having to control their own capital and funds. So is there any benefits or maybe even cons that you can see from that?
So the benefits obviously are they're holding real Bitcoin. That's the whole message behind it, right? Not your keys, not your coins. But the initial thing was exactly that. They did the market analysis, Julian especially, and he came up with, hey, no one of these brokers is actually offering a self-custodial manner to buy. And plus most of them being exchanges, you do have a wallet, but it's not your wallet because you don't own the keys. So there was that need in the market to fill that gap. And obviously they come with a lot of challenges. You do regularly face maybe some retail users of the app who go like, hey, what are these 12 words for actually? Like, is it important to know them? So there's a lot of education happening on our end in marketing and on the content side. And obviously with things such as variable costs in the business, if you have high transaction fees, if you have various times in the markets where you kind of go like, ooh, okay, if you are self-custodial, you do make some quote unquote sacrifices. That is definitely where it gets a bit more troublesome, and obviously creating a UX that is appealing, simple to use, but doesn't sacrifice self custody. That is sort of the main aspect we're working on. But, it would be boring if you don't have challenges. So we're ready to
Yeah.
face them.
Yeah, you mentioned there about a lot of users coming in and maybe not immediately being able to recognize self-custody, the benefits and potential cons of that. Are there any other topics that you get a lot of new users coming in and maybe struggle to comprehend regarding Bitcoin? Do they maybe not understand its open source, decentralized nature, or decreasing inflation rate? Is there any other things that you see like a lot of common pitfalls for new users coming into the space?
So I think you need to depend a bit on like total newbies who may have heard about Bitcoin in a newspaper article, and they then Google and they find us and they buy their first sats with us. Um, now that we offer the Lightning Network as well, which is pretty self-explanatory to most Bitcoiners, but obviously, regular investors, they look at this and go like, where are the two ways to sending Bitcoin? These little things are a bit where we just have to make a bigger and better effort at explaining it to them. But mostly, if there's anything, it's involving the seed phrase. Why do I need to know these 12 words? Do I need to, store them in a Google Drive or something? And you have to explain, no, that's not beneficial. It's really reasonable to keep them offline or in a safe place. And then obviously the whole transaction aspect, if the costs increase, you do occasionally get the message where they go like, oh, why am I suddenly not getting $100 worth, but maybe like $95 worth of Bitcoin? So there are some pros and cons on both sides, but if you want to hold Bitcoin, this is the right way to go. And it's the best learning curve we found out. They can dive into the cold water and right away have to learn how to hold these things and how to interact with them.
Nice. And you mentioned the Lightning Network. Are you getting a lot of users utilizing Lightning? Because I feel to some extent the definition of Bitcoin's maybe changed for quite a lot of people. Obviously, initially it was an electronic peer-to-peer currency, and the Lightning Network and other layer 2 solutions are probably helping to accelerate that. But has it maybe changed into more of a savings tech? Obviously, Relay helping people to automatically invest into Bitcoin. How do you kind of see the balance of currency that people should spend and savings technology?
Sure. So if we check our numbers, see a significant amount of users actually using our DCA feature. So they get to set up an auto invest plan. More than 55%. I'm not sure at the exact number currently, but that's the latest one going from last month. So you do see Big Junction uses it as a store of value, as something to save in. We then see roughly around, at current rates, 10% of our users using Lightning. We don't offer the stacking with Lightning possibility yet. So it's more of a wallet where you can transfer some of the Bitcoin you buy into the Lightning wallet and then use it this way. But we definitely see the interest. We see the payments. We see the routing. So that's super interesting. We also see the struggles, that you still have with these scaling solutions, because being self-custodial and Lightning, you do occasionally run in to the known errands. But at the end of the day, there's really demand for actually using Bitcoin as a means of payment, whether that be with Lightning or with transactions. And definitely what we see is the whole savings aspect.
Nice. And obviously, I'm a little bit biased towards Bitcoin, and I'm assuming working for Relay, you are as well. But has it always just been Bitcoin for Relay, or has there ever been a conversation about potentially expanding to other cryptocurrencies, or how's that going?
No, so from day one, it was clear that it's Bitcoin only. There was never really a need to add any other coins, even things like stable coins and stuff, where it might be happening in the future, who knows, but definitely not any other quote-unquote cryptos. If anything, it stays Bitcoin only.
Fair enough. I thought that would be the answer. It's definitely the same answer for me. Just wanted to double check. And notice Relay aren't just specifically for retail clients. You actually offer services to private, I think it's called on Relay, private investors, as well as businesses as well. So how's that been going?
So that really came out of a necessity roughly about 18 months ago, where we started out with the Relay app initially. So that's the retail app. You can download it in the countries it's available at the moment. We're fighting a bit there, obviously, with the regulatory field, where can you offer it, with what licensing. We'll hopefully solve that problem soon by getting the MiCA license over here in Europe. But nevertheless, there was a lot of interest by specific investors who went like, hey, I do have my DCA savings plan, but, I recently just sold a house, or I sold some gold, or I have other assets I want to actually liquidate and move over to Bitcoin. Is there also a way to buy a certain amount X with you directly, OTC, over the counter? And we were like, yeah, sure, that was always possible, But then we started seeing more and more interest, and that's where we started building out the Relay Private team, which is with dedicated relationship managers in Mario and Benjamin. They both take all the time in their day, to educate these people who do buy in larger volumes and who also maybe have some questions. So they're always there for them. And then on the other side, obviously also with the business field, where Mario in particular is speaking to many prominent businesses, small to mid-sized businesses, who are really keen on actually getting rid of their cash at times, because the cash reserves are just there inflating away, and saving it in technology and in an asset like Bitcoin, not just from a monetary perspective, but just also, as we've seen, for example, with the MicroStrategy playbook, that can really be a benefit for the longevity of the company.
Yeah, and just going back to the Relay Private, because I'm a little interested. Have you noticed any different kind of behavior when it comes to the investing strategies or approach of these potentially higher net worth clients compared to, the people drip feeding just €100 in here and there? Do you notice that they maybe buy when prices are low and accumulate at a discount, whereas retail maybe act a little bit more on FOMO? Is there any kind of trends you've noticed?
So not immediate trends in relationship to price. Obviously, if the price spikes, you do get, let's call them some maybe old laying around leads who then approach you again saying like, hey, I wanted to buy last time, it didn't work out or something. I'd be really interesting now. But what we did see is that a lot of gold investors and specifically real estate investors ever since December last year have been very keen on actually liquidating parts of their portfolio and saving in Bitcoin, just because it for them is a no-brainer asset. It's actually something that doesn't necessarily create cash flow, but it creates safety for their businesses or their portfolio as a whole. So there's been a lot around these talks when we saw, especially in Europe, some of these real estate mini crises, let's call it, where you had big real estate companies going bust, or the interest rates were just risen by an oblivion by the ECB, and they started noticing like, hey, our assets, which we thought were safe for like the next 30 to let's say 50 years, suddenly they become very attackable, and we need something that is decoupled, or at least not as influenced from central banks as real estate or other commodities. And that's where we've seen the biggest interest and also the biggest growth in Relai Private, where these investors really approached us and were like, can you help us out with this? And it's a very gradual process. They maybe start with a one-time buy. Currently, we have a minimum amount of 100,000 Swiss francs or euros to get on board with the private team. But more or less all of them return because they've seen Bitcoin's performance and also the smoothness of the process, to be able to have that relationship manager, to be able to talk to them. Things along these lines really help them out. And then obviously in comparison with the retail side of things, there it's probably FOMO driven. The good thing for us is it doesn't matter if it dips or if it rips. In both cases, we see more and more orders being created and people actually going into Bitcoin. So that's a good thing. But with the private team, there's definitely more and more interest in how to break free from what appeared to be the safe bet with real estate or commodities. But now they're looking for something else.
I'm guessing it's probably something similar with businesses. I'm just wondering if you see kind of businesses almost using net revenue every month, like you said, excess cash on their balance sheets. Are you seeing similar trends in businesses, again, wanting to just accumulate BTC to negate inflation and rising costs and whatnot?
So yeah, we do see a lot of interest by businesses. Funnily enough, we have most businesses, put Bitcoin on their balance sheet as a treasury reserve asset, as a cash reserve, instead of just holding inflatable paper money. And a few of them actually came back to us and set up a savings plan with us. So, they continuously buy either on every Monday or like once a month, a fixed amount of Bitcoin with us. And for others, it really was, but I guess that's more because one of the founders is probably a Bitcoiner and he's seen the MicroStrategy playbook and all of these things where they turn excess cash, obviously, into Bitcoin and then put that on the balance sheet. But you definitely see the interest. And I think the more we see the likes of MicroStrategy, of course, Semler Scientific or MetaPlanet, who are showing that it can be done on a large market cap scale and on a small market cap scale. Both of them are public at the end of the day. Why shouldn't small and mid-sized businesses follow as well? So the interest is definitely growing. It's a bit more troublesome because getting businesses on is always a bit slower, just due to the regulatory framework you have to operate in. They often have to do, the whole proof of funds thing and things. But once they're set up, you can definitely see a keen interest by them. And from the looks of it, from what I've heard from Mario as well, week by week, the interest just keeps growing.
Nice. And do Relay approach businesses to potentially put Bitcoin on the balance sheets, or are you just approached by businesses potentially wanting to explore it? I'm interested to kind of hear if you are approaching businesses. I know you mentioned MicroStrategy and MetaPlanet and whatnot, but how do you approach maybe a more hesitant business to maybe say, hey, you really should consider at least a small percentage of your excess cash to be invested into Bitcoin?
Sure. So we do have or the business team actually has a sales pitch or a sales deck where they present the case for Bitcoin, and it's very rarely there's something in there along the lines of, oh, MicroStrategy has done it and their stock ripped by more than 1,200%.
Yeah.
It's more about the proof of concept, if that makes sense. So showing the success rate of, for example, the ETFs. A lot of businesses draw that comparison between Wall Street and assets. Obviously, we have MicroStrategy in there, showing the growth and showing the potential their business has. But it's really just proving that Bitcoin is different to what they've seen before. It's also, because it's a bearer asset, the unique asset to actually hold in your business. So if they also have questions about multi-sig and these things, we're there to help them. And at the end of the day, it's the arguably easiest, I might be biased, but arguably the easiest way of actually turning your cash into an asset. Because if you think about of all the steps required to just set up like an ETF savings plan for your business instead of holding cash or buying bonds and all of the costs involved and all of the administrative work that comes with it, just having Bitcoin and converting it and holding it there and having a regular check-in with them is the unique selling point where our business team is also reaching out and actively approaching these businesses.
So I'm not sure exactly how long you've been approaching businesses, but I was just wondering if that number's grown substantially, say, in the past 6 months where price action's been a little more stagnant, or if you saw more of a growth. I know you said before if it rips or it dumps, you usually see a little bit of like a more influx of users coming into either DCA or something. Is it the same story for businesses?
The business growth was really so slow and steady early on, I would say. And it's not explosive to a point where you went like, oh, this is just before the ETFs launched, for example, and then it exploded or something. But it's been growing along more and more nicely. I also have to say that a lot of them, if they do find us, if we're not approaching them, there's definitely, I've read about Bitcoin in the media. I've heard about this American company who has it on their balance sheet. Or we also have other case studies that we released where they've seen that also business owners are essentially doing this. So it's kind of like maybe a bit of a fight between, business owners and businesses as a whole to see who's first. So you definitely have like an organic growth there. But ever since the business team did expand and now starts approaching more businesses as well, you do see the influx and the interest growing at a time where you would think if the price is moving sideways and it's not ripping as much as it maybe has earlier this year, is quite surprising. But it's also a great time to get them on because they do have their time to learn about it. They're not missing a lot of action, whether it rips or dips. And we just continuously see that more of them join Relai Business.
You get many private or businesses maybe getting in touch and saying, I want to get involved with Bitcoin, but then maybe being a little apprehensive because price is a little bit at a discount compared to recent all-time highs, or a little bit more stagnant. Maybe they say, well, I'm going to wait for price to rally a little bit, or I'm going to wait for even lower prices. Or is there not so much strategy involved with a lot of these clients? Maybe they're just drip feeding in regardless.
So there's definitely one or two of the private clients, who does maybe like a limit order. We also offer this capability. If you are a private client, you do buy spot in the app, for example, but you can also have the possibility to do limit orders. So occasionally you may get a nervous message saying like, hey, maybe I should have waited a week and the price would have been like $1,000 less or something. But that's then more for them to accumulate more Bitcoin. So it's never really, oh, I lost money because it now dipped within the 4-week time span. And if you take a bigger look on things, you would see that you're still in the up. So there's not a lot of influence there. Obviously, you do get a lot more inquiries if the price pumps. So there are significantly a lot more big people who actually book appointments and speak to our relationship managers. But there's not really something in there where you go, ooh, people are skeptical or something. There's really sort of a nice flow of into things. And if they got questions, they generally just ask right away. that's also a massive help, so that you don't sort of have to force it down their throats. They're very keen to learning.
Okay, so hypothetical business owner question. If I were to ask you, how does Relay see Bitcoin evolving over the next, say, 5 or 10 years? How would you maybe respond to a question like that?
Sure. So because we currently serve the European market, our focus is obviously quite Europe-based. And to us, the answer is really simple. We currently see between 5 and 10% of people in Europe who hold Bitcoin or crypto assets. And that number is just significantly too small. So whether what happens with central banking, whether what happens with the world economy, you have seen with Bitcoin that continuous growth, and we will also see this going forward just by naturally looking at the innovation that's taking place. And the more businesses, the more investors get on. So our mission is to make that not 5 to 10%, but ideally 90% or more being Bitcoin only. That's sort of the little thing we have to work there as well. But we would say within the next 10 years, you will definitely see that growth. You will definitely see that adoption. And whether we can add a small part of the cake to that growth or not, that remains to be seen. But our goal is definitely to offer the simplest solution so that more people can get on board.
Well, that's a lovely goal. If you were to potentially be asked about the macro economy, if a new retail private business came in and said, and maybe expecting a little bit of a recessionary period throughout Europe, is that something you take into account when you're discussing things with businesses? Or are you mainly just saying Bitcoin could maybe be its own asset and not necessarily so attached to the broader global economy?
So you definitely have the questions regarding, we just have our cash, for example, as a business lying there, and we do see it being inflated away, especially if they hold the euro, for example. With Swiss businesses, we do see a bit more hesitancy, I should call it, towards that. Like they do buy Bitcoin at the end, but they go like, more looking at it as an investment perspective. For main Europeans, it's definitely our money is being eaten away and we do need something, and we found Bitcoin. So you kind of have that, let's call it economical and macro aspect to it. But we, from our end, never go down the roads of, it's a disinflationary asset. So it means that over the long period, you do X, Y, and Z with it, or it's a great hedge against insert whatever you want to say here. There's really more the interest from the client, and we can also or always offer perspectives and numbers to back that up. But I would say the current growth you're seeing is definitely because macro plays such a huge role, especially in Europe, where you also have different countries with obviously different inflation rates, different scenarios. So you do see the side of clients coming to us because of this, but we're always open to basically answer every question and not turn Bitcoin into this all fits one solution, but rather we try and find a case-by-case basis where we can actually help each client individually.
Nice. Do you provide a potential estimate on a best or worst case scenario potentially? Obviously, given Bitcoin's historic volatility, do you maybe say, this is an asset with tremendous upside potential given the gap in the market it can fill, but realistically, we do occasionally see 70% drawdowns, for example. But we do occasionally see, 1,000% price increases. Is this something you mention to clients, and do you even give potentially a downside or upside target to say, we wouldn't necessarily expect the price to dip beneath this, or we could see price rallying this high? Do you ever do anything like that, or are you a little bit more, we'll say, conservative with this approach?
No, so we're definitely conservative with this approach for two reasons. Number one, they should always do their own research, so they should always have the interest of coming to us and understanding where their Bitcoin positions will be at, whether that be now or in the future. But the second reason is quite easy, regulatory, because we're not allowed to obviously make financial recommendations. But we're quite surprised at times how pretty much well informed, especially private and business clients are, but also our retail clients. You do occasionally get the message saying like, oh, I wish I could have bought sooner, or I did buy it with an instant payment now, for example, even though it costs me a little bit more because credit and debit cards charge a small fee. But they definitely have their own goals coming up there. The only thing I think everyone in the Bitcoin community agrees with, the riskiest percentage in your portfolio that you can have with Bitcoin is 0%, but we'll leave it up to everyone whether they want to allocate a full-on, 99.9% allocation, or if they just want to go with maybe a 1% allocation. That's really up to them.
That was going to be my next question, and we touched on it a little bit before this call, discussing potentially recommendations of portfolio percentages. And I know you can't give exact figures, of course, but have you noticed potentially a difference in businesses that maybe allocate 5% compared to retail allocating 50%? Have you noticed any trends potentially where certain types of clients are investing more or less depending on how much they're initially investing?
So it's safe to say, I think, that retail investors are a bit more quote unquote risky than businesses. But then on the other hand, this just has, again, a lot to do with, the regulatory framework you operate your business in. It's obviously a much slower for a business to move along. Especially consider if you're like a mid-sized business, you may have a board that needs to approve certain decisions, or that just says we can't go over then amount X in our treasury. So we do see more, let's call it, risk on the retail side of things. But you definitely also have a few businesses who go like, yep, we've done our research, we're convinced, and we allocate a significant higher amount than what we would have probably previously done a few years ago. So there's a bit of that in there. But retail definitely is a bit more tasteful to try and get a bit bigger positions in their portfolios.
Nice. And I know a lot of Relay's great features revolve around dollar cost averaging. Historically, there's lots of data to prove that outperforms just hopelessly buying and selling when your gut feeling tends to make you buy high and sell low, unfortunately.
Yep.
Have you got any data potentially surrounding clients who dollar cost average more regularly, or people that potentially buy one-off purchases and maybe they're under or over performance compared to this steadier approach? I know, especially with retail clients, emotions play a huge role when it comes to their investments. So have you noticed that they typically, I know you said before with the limit orders, maybe wish that they'd bought lower, for example, but sure. Have you noticed any like feedback from users trying to time the market compared to dollar cost averaging in their experience?
No, I think it's really safe to say that our user base is pretty much a savings user base, let's call it. Yeah. So again, I think I don't have the correct number in my head now because we do record this early in September, so I would get the follow-up day numbers the next week. But as of last month, it was between 55.1 and 55.8% or something, where we do see dollar cost averaging. So more than half of our user base does have an auto invest plan. And they definitely use it to, buy Bitcoin either weekly or monthly. And what we do also follow along is if we have dips like we've had a few weeks ago, this was actually the record day in the company's history where we sold a bit more than 85 Bitcoin in one day. So people are just buying like crazy, and the dips are always a great opportunity for people to get in. So you have a lot more one-time buys there and a lot more single orders that are being executed. But in terms of, if people are, let's call it, throwing the last penny in just before payday hits or something, you don't really notice this. You just see these waves of, you have the steady holders, the savers, and then if it dips or if it rips, you have these single orders that do come in. But it's safe to say that dips are pretty much the one where we do see the most interest.
Fair enough. And earlier on, you mentioned a lot of the particularly private clients coming in potentially have experience in investing in gold and potentially real estate or other tangible hard assets, if you like. And there's a bit of an affiliation with Bitcoin potentially being a digital gold. Do you get a reference to Bitcoin being a digital gold or anything like that from potential new users? Or do you have a better analogy of how we can compare Bitcoin to potentially someone that maybe doesn't understand the asset completely?
No, I think digital gold is pretty much what sums it up, just because the comparisons are there. And all of these benefits that gold does have, we have to acknowledge this. It's not as worthless as fiat currencies, at least in my opinion. Obviously, everyone is entitled to their own. But besides that, you do occasionally hear the, it's sound money aspect, but that's where you realize this is someone who's already invested time into Bitcoin. So digital gold is also mostly the simplest explanation for people, because you can immediately go into the arguments. It is capped in supply. You can actually hold the asset. It's a bearer asset. You don't have to trust a third party. And then all of the bells and whistles with fungibility, with divisibility, and all of these things. So if someone is new and they get approached and they're curious, digital gold is really the anecdote we usually stick to.
Nice. And if you could give some advice to potentially retail clients wanting to use Relay or become involved with Bitcoin, do you have any advice to potentially help them improve their investing? Obviously, a big part of what I do is trying to help educate people to make sure they're not acting too much on emotions and making more data-driven and strategic decisions with their investments. Is there anything you could give, any similar advice you could give?
Sure. So we have a few resources over at Relay. If people are curious to get to know more, if they sort of want to stay up to date with the weekly events, we have our newsletter, This Week in Bitcoin, which we do write in English and in German. So depending what language you speak, you can always subscribe there. For newcomers, or if you're just trying to orange pill friends and families, we have a 21-day email course, let's call it, where you get sort of the 21 basics. It's called the 21 Bitcoin basics, delivered to your inbox each day with the references and what you have to learn. And from there on out, we're really open-minded and telling them that we have a few blog articles where we recommend the best Bitcoin books, videos, people to follow. So really just giving a framework people can download, look into, and keep being informed about. And then obviously, if they do make the final step and they say, yep, we want to buy Bitcoin, there's always the Relay app there as well.
Great, sounds amazing. Any other remarks you'd like to fit in before we maybe conclude this little discussion?
No, I think we covered pretty much everything. As we've proven it, as probably every DCA calculator in the world has proven, it is the way to go. And if you're in Europe, if you're based over here and you want to get a simple interface and you want to get a broker that does that for you in Bitcoin only, we're the right way to go.
100%. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been lovely chatting. And maybe we can catch up in the future. And I'd love to hear more about how Relay continues to grow and support not only retail, but also high net worth individuals and business clients as well. It's very interesting to hear the habits and kind of their approach when it comes to investing in Bitcoin. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope everyone enjoyed listening to this.
Thank you for having me.